It's good to be with you. I've known Daniel since he was a teenager. I'm one of the few people that gets to call him Dan and him not bite my head off. So if you want to hear some stories, stick around after the call. No, I'm just kidding. But I have known him since he was about 17. So it's just a privilege to be with you today. Thank you, Daniel, for inviting me. Thanks to the Republic Bank team. I'm just honored to be with you and share with you this morning. So just to give you a little bit of context before I jump in about my background, I've been in some form of leadership for over 20 years. I started as my background's environmental biology, believe it or not. And I started in the health department. And at the same time, when I was in my early 20s, I was a volunteer youth and college pastor, basically doing that full time as well. So it was a lot, but it was fun. After that, I jumped into leading a nonprofit, a regional nonprofit based out of Rochester, New York for 5 years. I was the executive director of that. And then we moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts after 5 years. That was in 2009. And we started and founded a local church right across the river from downtown Boston and Cambridge, which, as you know, we're sandwiched right between Harvard and MIT. So very easy place. Not really. It's been a challenge, but it's been great. And then recently in January of 2020, after 20 years of leadership, I started an executive and leadership coaching business. I've also written a couple books, done a lot of different things over the years. I just say that to give you a little bit of context. So Daniel informed me that, where you all are in your industry, that it's been a busy year. Just when you think things should be slowing down, they're not slowing down. You've coupled that with this refi boom, and it looks often like there's no end in sight, right? And so I do understand the concept in leadership, and especially even though I've never been in the mortgage industry, the concept of you've got to make hay while the sun shines, and that's relevant to you all. And I've been in those seasons, but at the same time, I realize that we have to at some point say it's no longer a season, but the new normal has become the normal. So we've been in this season of COVID, for example. It's been 6 months. It's probably time to start making some rhythms because there is no end in sight with some of these things. And the longer we keep saying it's a season, the longer it keeps going, where we need to make healthy rhythms and just make it the normal. So let me just start with a personal story. When I was 27 years old, I actually had my first bout of burnout, a mini nervous breakdown, I guess you could say. And what happened was I was newly married, just a couple of years, and I was supposed to go away for the weekend and be trained in college and young adult ministry. But instead, I fell on the floor, curled up in a ball, and cried for 3 hours. And I didn't really know what was happening, didn't know what was going on. After I got up from that 3 hours, I spent several months reflecting, and the long and short of it is I was not paying attention to the signs. I had been not able to sleep. I'd felt anxious. I'd felt down and blue and depressed, which wasn't my normal demeanor. But I just kind of, at 27 years old, pushed through it and said, this will pass. Let's just keep going, keep working hard, keep moving. Basically doing two full-time jobs. But what I found out that started me on a journey, and it took many years, but to learn healthy rhythms in my life. And what I learned is I didn't get there overnight, and I wasn't going to find health and wholeness overnight either. It took a while just to get out of that hole and start going on a path towards health and wholeness. Now, maybe you're not where I was, when I fell on the floor and had a mini nervous breakdown, but you're probably tired. You're probably at least weary. You might be frustrated. You might just feel off kilter a little bit after you've had this season where there seems like there's no end in sight and it just keeps going. But maybe you're a little worse than that if you're honest, and I'm not going to make anybody raise their hands, but maybe you feel like you're fraying a little bit at the edges. You're unraveling, like one of those seams you find on your shirt that if you pull it, you're just going to keep pulling it. And so you're not wanting to pull the seam right now. You're having trouble sleeping. Maybe you're a little bit anxious, or maybe I was, or worse, maybe you're on the very edge of burnout. Maybe your spouse is threatening to leave you. Maybe there's some sort of breakdown that you feel is imminent. Maybe you're not in a good place. And then it gets worse. We add this season of COVID-19 onto what is already a busy season where we're pushing, pushing, pushing. We add lockdown and homeschooling our kids if you have kids when you're not a homeschooler. Maybe you're single and you just feel lonely because you can't get out and do the things that you could do before. And so we get in this place where we know something needs to change, but we're not sure how to change it. And Don't worry, Dan can send you the slides on these too, so don't worry about writing furiously unless you want to take a few notes. But here's the question I want to ask you today. Is it possible to be happy and productive at work, fulfilled at home, and make a difference in the world? Now, I want to just be clear. I'm not talking about a perfect life or even a balanced life. I'm talking about a whole life. I really don't think there's such a thing as work life balance. We hear that term all the time. I think it's a myth. There's this guy named Daniel Harkavy. He wrote a book with Michael Hyatt called Living Forward. He said this. He said, "We fool ourselves if we think balance means giving equal attention to everything in our lives." He went on to say, and it's on your screen, balance is not giving equal, but appropriate attention to to each of the various categories of your life. See, work life balance, it's a myth, but healthy rhythms are not a myth. And so, as leadership guru John Maxwell said, he said, if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others. So, I want to just give you a few focus questions to kind of frame our time today that hopefully you're going to be able to answer by the end of this short talk. The first one is this: what effect do healthy rhythms have on my work performance? And then, secondly, how do healthy rhythms ensure that I'm more fulfilled in every area of my life? And so by the end of our time, I'm hoping that you'll be able to understand why healthy rhythms lead to wholeness and how that affects not just your work life, but your overall life as a whole. So I want to give you, I've titled this today, Healthy Rhythms for a Whole You. And I want to give you 4 core rhythms that are going to help you thrive, not just survive, but thrive. So let's start with the most obvious first, because this is a call for work. It's the first rhythm is work and activity rhythms. Now, you could put things in this rhythm such as job, finances, physical health, and community service. So it encompasses a lot of things, but we're just going to talk about the job and work rhythm. See, work can be extremely fulfilling, or it can be the bane of your existence, or it could be somewhere in the middle where it's just sort of boring and mundane and you do what you do every day and you go home and wait for Friday. But I heard this quote recently and it stuck with me ever since. It's hard to find a happy person that's not happy at work. Isn't that true? I mean, think about it. We spend roughly 1/3 of our lives, of the best years of our lives, at work. From the time we're 18 to around 65, we spend 8 or more hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week at work. So your job literally is like a second marriage, isn't it? And so if we're not happy there, something's going to be off in our lives. Now, in my life, just recently, this was at the beginning of 2020, I found I was struggling with my sense of purpose, my sense of fulfillment in my work. I've been in some form of ministry actually for 20 years, and I've done things outside of that, but that was sort of my main focus. But it wasn't that I was totally losing my interest in that, but something was happening. There was discontent happening in my heart, and I didn't know what it was. And so I did something sort of radical. I went on I did a 3-month social media fast, meaning I abstained from social media. And I decided I was just going to tune out the noise and I was going to put some focus and energy into thinking about what I enjoyed, reading scripture about it, reading some books about purpose, and just exploring that area of my life. And what I came out with on the other end was I realized that I actually get energy from new things. So when I feel stuck in something for too long and it doesn't feel like there's the forward motion that I want, I don't feel fulfilled. And so that's what prompted me to do a dream that I had for a long time, which was start the leadership and coaching business. Um, we usually think of discontent and dissatisfaction as a negative feeling, but author Chris Guillebeau, he reframes it and he says this about discontent. He says discontent is an indicator light on the dashboard of our lives. So if we pay attention to it, it actually can tell us if something is wrong and we can make an adjustment. See, there's 2 choices if your work is not fulfilling. There might be more, but 2 I can see. First one is career change, right? I'm not telling any of you to change your career. That's up to you, but that is an option if we're discontent in what we're doing. The other option is we can change the culture. A lot of you on this call are leaders. And so I want to ask you, do you know the vision, the mission, the values, and the beliefs of the company? Are you living them? Is the work environment that you're creating, is it fun? Is it high energy? In other words, here's the litmus test. Do people like coming to work? Do they enjoy working on your team? Or is it toxic? There's this principle called the 5-to-1 principle that basically says you have to say 5 positive, helpful, constructive things in order to say one thing that's constructive, or there will be a toxic environment in your leadership. So I want to ask you today, as leaders, as people on teams, what is one decision you can make to take a step towards career fulfillment? Maybe it's a career change you need to consider. Maybe this would be a hard one, but maybe there's someone you need to let go. Maybe you need to revisit the why of your company, or maybe you need to just redesign the office atmosphere. You know what the word decide means? It actually means to put to death all other options. So that's the power you have as a leader. Your decisions carry weight for others, and so make sure that they're good decisions. The second rhythm I want to talk about in your life is spiritual rhythms. So this could be things like identity, purpose, spiritual practices, silence, and solitude. See, it's actually spiritual rhythms that help us flourish as human beings. I want to read this quote to you. It's from an unknown author from the Psalms. He, and it says earlier in the passage, one who meditates, is like a tree planted by the streams of water that yields fruit in its season. And its leaf does not wither, and all that he does, pay attention to this, in all that he does, he prospers. That seems pretty appealing, doesn't it? Maybe some of you have heard of the book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. He says in that book, he's referring to what he calls keystone habits. And he says, some habits actually have the power to start a chain reaction and transform everything. And so he says the most important habits, when they shift, they remake other habits or patterns. Now, meditation, I'm just going to lump it into what I call spiritual rhythms. Meditation is what many people identify as one of those keystone habits. So, spiritual rhythms have been shown to reduce stress, improve focus and brain function, make us more compassionate and forgiving, decrease blood pressure, and a whole slew of other things that these spiritual rhythms give to our lives. So, for me personally, I've spent the last 20 years, my day doesn't start right unless I spend some time reading the scriptures and some time praying and some time in silence, just listening. And it's been that way for nearly 20 years. And I'm going to say this, I haven't been perfect at it by any means, but that keeps me grounded when life feels like it's spinning out of control. That's been the anchor for me the last 20 years. So I want to ask you today, what are your spiritual rhythms? And I'm going to suggest two that you need to consider if this is the area that you want to put emphasis on. First of all, a daily rhythm. Maybe it's thankfulness. Maybe it's yoga. Maybe it's reading your Bible. Maybe it's meditating. The point is, you've got to find a daily rhythm. It could be 5 minutes in silence before you get in the shower, or before you go to work, thinking through things. But you've got to have a spiritual rhythm in your life. Secondly, on a weekly basis, you need a day of rest. I know that's hard sometimes, but our bodies weren't designed to go 24/7. And so a daily and a weekly rhythm. I actually have a book I wrote called Rest Assured. It's on my website, about the rhythm of a weekly, what some people call a weekly Sabbath or a day of rest, where I talk all about it. The third rhythm I want to tell you about is relational rhythms. Okay. So this would be family, friends, coaches, coworkers, acquaintances, etc. So what healthy relationships do is they actually help us flourish. Healthy relationships give us wings. You can go to the next slide, Dan. They give us wings in our lives. I like what Gary Smalley said. He said this: life is relationships, the rest is just details. There's a story I love. Many of you are familiar with Mr. Rogers. You probably saw the most recent movie about him. I thought it was great. But at 70 years old, Mr. Rogers won his third Daytime Emmy Award. And he was actually at the same time getting awarded the Emmy Lifetime Achievement Award. And so, in front of all these soap opera stars, TV hosts, talk show hosts, celebrities, he made a small bow when he got up to the microphone. And here's what he said. It's so key. All of us have special ones who have loved us into being. Would you just take along with me 10 seconds to think of the people who have helped you become who you are? 10 seconds of silence. Now get the picture, right? He lifts his wrist and looks at his watch. There's giddy laughter happening because people realize this guy's actually serious. He's going to take 10 seconds on national television and he wants us to think about the people who made us who we are. Well, here's what happened. The guy who wrote the article that the book was based on said this: the jaws clenched, the bosoms heaved, the mascara ran, and the tears fell upon the beglittered gathering like rain leaking down a crystal chandelier. And Mr. Rogers finally looked up from his watch and said, "May God be with you." It's such a powerful story. Here's why. Every significant thing in life, good or bad, is tied to a relationship or a person. I mean, isn't that the truth? So I'm going to do the same thing today. I'm going to ask us to take 10 seconds to just think about the people who have helped you become who you are. And I'm going to be like Mr. Rogers. Don't worry, I've got the time. So let's take 10 seconds right now. I want you to just think of the people who have made you who you are. I'm pretty sure probably a couple people came to your mind who've made a significant impact. And so I want to ask you, how are your relationships? Your family? Where do you need to invest energy? Is it your family? Is it deeper friendships? Is it that teenage son or daughter who's struggling? Is it a coach or a counselor? Is it work relationships? Is it some casual relationships that could lead to deeper ones? See, here's the point. Healthy relationships take work, don't they? So maybe it's time to just pull the trigger and go on that trip, or get a counselor, or lean into that relationship with your kids, or get coffee with someone. The final rhythm that I want to tell you about is emotional rhythms. This would involve feelings, fun, decisions, and engaging your intellect. So emotions are actually the dashboard of our lives. Pete Scazzero said this: emotions are the language of the soul. Now, this is hard for some people, and admittedly, it's hard for men sometimes, but it could be hard for women as well. Um, but here's the thing: you can't always live by your feelings, but you'd better pay attention to them, because your feelings are indicators on the dashboard of your life. So they're often the hardest to identify, the emotional rhythms in our lives. They're also the hardest to replenish, because it's not like physical rest. If we're tired, we know we need to just get a good night's sleep. But if we're emotionally exhausted and depleted, how do we replenish? I'll give you an example of a story. A few weeks back, I was having trouble sleeping, just for about 4 or 5 days straight. And after several days, I said, I need to talk to my wife about how I'm feeling. Now, it used to go several weeks or several months, and I just wasn't picking up on I needed to talk to someone about it. Anyway, I shared with her, and as I began to talk it out, basically, I came to the conclusion that I had read this grim report in Time magazine about the financial consequences of COVID-19 being worse than the Great Depression, and I allowed a seed of fear to be planted. And that no, not sleeping was a symptom coming from a feeling of our unrest and anxiety and fear that was caused by the seed of this article. I had let the seed that was spoken through that article plant in my heart, and I believed it instead of believing the best for my life and believing that, um, you know, I'm going to be okay. We're going to be okay. See, we have to pay attention to our feelings. So there's a few practical ideas I want to give you before we jump into our final conclusion here. Here's some ideas to start paying attention to your feelings. Start a journal. If you feel like you're not ready to share with someone, start by acknowledging how you feel to yourself. Pick up that journal and take a courageous step. Secondly, you can sit down with a person, maybe a spouse, a partner, a friend, and here's a great question to ask each other. What is one way you felt today, and why? And just answer that question. Start getting comfortable talking about your feelings to people. Here's another one: schedule something fun. When's the last time you did something fun? Fun is part of emotional replenishment. And lastly, you can engage your intellect. Read a good book, read some classic literature, read the Bible, whatever's going to inspire you. Here's the big idea I want to share with you today, and I want to ask you to do just one thing today. The big idea is this: healthy rhythms lead to whole people. Let me say that again. Healthy rhythms lead to whole people. So whole people are happier, They're more productive at work, they're more fulfilled at home, and they're able to actually think about what it means to make a difference in the world. See, you're actually a human being, you're not a human doing. And so whole people are mature, they're self aware, and it affects every area of our lives as we establish healthy rhythms and work towards becoming whole people. So here's what I want to ask you today. I want to encourage you not to, you can't focus on all these areas at once. So here's what I want to ask. I want you, just put up that next slide, Dan. I want you to write down one rhythm and one step that you're going to take in the next 48 hours in one of these areas. And I want you to write it into a SMART goal. In other words, make it specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And then I want you to communicate it to another person. So take a minute, look at these different rhythms. Don't focus on all of them. Just think about one small step in one area that you need to take to start establishing a healthy rhythm in that area and write it down. As we close and we're going to open it up for some questions, I want you to imagine how your life would feel different if you had healthy rhythms in one of these areas, how it would feel in your family, how it would feel at your workplace, how would it feel in your friendships, how it would feel in your spiritual life or your emotional life. How could it feel if you were another step closer to wholeness in your life? Because here's why this works. Every time you plant a good seed, you're going to reap a good harvest. If you plant an apple seed, you get an apple tree. If you plant healthy rhythms, you will become more and more whole. I want to close with this John Maxwell quote. Most people have uphill dreams. The problem is we have too many downhill habits. Could I say the problem is we have too many downhill rhythms? So I want to open it up.